Hello, my name is Dr. Fear. I want to thank you for watching my video. If you enjoy listening to scary stories and watching scary video compilations, please hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified when I release new content. If you enjoy this video, I ask that you please hit that like button and leave a comment as it does help my channel enormously. Now, without further ado, kick back, dim the lights, and enjoy the story. This happened about 3 years ago, and it was during one of my little road trip phases that I had when I moved to the city from my little hometown down south. It was spring break, 2018. My teenage antics were at an all-time high as I was only a sophomore in high school at the time. Needless to say, my friends and I were quite the avid users of alcohol, respectively. Not that I endorse its use or anything. I mean, we were just teens at the time. I had just made the trip down to my hometown and was relaxing at my friend's house when my friend, who I was staying with at the time, suggested that we should take a camping trip and have some fun since I was down there for the break. My friend's name is Doug, and our other friends who were invited to the trip were Louis and Isaiah, while I go by the name Eric. Doug had found this really cool camping spot out by the lake that neither me, Louis, or Isaiah had ever been to, and needless to say, I'm an outdoorsy person and I was excited about the whole thing, not even the slightest bit aware of what awaited us. On the second day of my trip back to my hometown, we had decided to head out early in the morning and pack a couple of beers and hard liquor bottles into the cooler with our camping materials. This was a small town, mind you, so getting these things was as easy as taking candy from a baby. Since I was the only one with a license at the time, it was my responsibility to drive us, and since I was staying with Doug, that meant that we only had to pick up Louis and Isaiah on the way. We began the drive to the camping spot, which was a good 45-minute drive from where our town was located. We blasted the tunes of uncanny rappers and nonchalant trap music that every teen was listening to at the time, although I wish I had better taste in music. We drove past the trees that winded down the sides of our road leading out of town, and almost always they would encompass the sunlight beaming down overhead with their tall, sprawling branches. We cleared the woods into an opening of farm fields on both sides, while we were following an old road that had a turnoff which one direction led to the highway, whilst the other led to an older, run-down, much smaller town than ours that led to the lake that we were driving to. Without a second thought, I put the turn signal on leading to the road opposite the highway, which led to much more dense and dark forest. The trees blocked most of the sunlight just as the others did, but this was much more noticeable as we had barely enough sunlight to not turn on our headlights. The road turned to dirt, and the rocks could be heard bouncing off of the side of my tires nonchalantly. We passed the first few houses and immediately noticed there was something off about these houses. It wasn't like they were old trailers or anything. It's just that they all had tin-like chimneys that were pumping out smoke in the air, and it was the beginning of spring, so it wasn't even that cold. We continued down the old dirt path that led to the lake, and after passing the rest of the houses down that road, we noticed that almost all of the houses had the same tin-like chimney with smoke blowing out of the top. We arrived at the spot near the lake, and needless to say, it was a pretty cool spot since it was the only spot that had a bit of an opening in the trees on one side due to the lake being right next to us. The dirt path that led to the spot wound around in a circle, and in the middle there was a tiny patch of grass with 3 tiny trees surrounding it. I parked my car next to the middle of the circle, and we decided to set up our tent near the patch with our soon-to-be campfire being in the middle of the patch. We split into 2 groups. Me and Doug were there to gather firewood, while Louis and Isaiah gathered rocks to make the pit. Me and Doug headed the opposite direction of the lake, where the ever-so-dense forest awaited us with open arms to gather our sticks and leaves.
You meet any cute chicks up in the city yet, or are you still too much of a wimp to even ask for their number?
Doug said. You know me, man. It's always the latter. He laughed, and I shrugged it off with a chuckle, as it's usually his motive to tease me since we are friends after all. As we gathered our firewood, Doug casually looks up from his task and notices something up ahead in the tall grass which almost surpassed our shoulders at this point.
You see that rusty old truck up there?
Doug asked. I looked up and saw what he alluded to and said, "Yeah, you mean that old rust bucket? Yeah, I see it. I wonder who left it there." We casually picked up the remainder of the firewood and headed back to our camping spot. Dusk was beginning to set in, and it was about this time that we cracked open the cooler full of liquor and sat down at the bristling campfire we made to accompany us. We sat in our circle, telling god-awful horror stories and failed attempts at getting the ladies, all while laughing and having a good time as we sipped our beers and broke out the shots. "My body count is at least 10 by now, but I'm not sure, since I stopped counting," Lewis boasted. "So what? You can't count now, Mr. I've slept with 10 people, but I'm not counting," Isaiah laughed. "Be honest. You really think we study in math?" Doug exclaimed. "Yeah. You know, guys, I say we toast to that," I slurred. We all laughed and raised our beers in unison. The darkness around the campfire and the surrounding woods had completely set in at this point, and to say the least, we were all fairly drunk, since at this point we were all walking in a straight line around the campfire, acting as if we could pass a sobriety test. Doug falls next to the log we were sitting on, Lewis as well, and Isaiah followed suit, while I wasn't exactly getting a grasp on our makeshift sobriety test and kept stumbling and falling over next to them as they laughed at my effort. Shut up, you guys. Cut me some slack." I took a long, deep breath and exhaled, with a bloated face as I could feel the alcohol lingering in my throat. I immediately felt a sudden urge to go vomit, so I told them I'd be right back, and they laughed even harder since they figured out what I was going to do. I made it all the way to where the tall grass was and let my stomach do the talking. I didn't notice how dark the surrounding area actually was until I finished my business and turned back to see the campfire in the distance, which looked like a small speck compared to what surrounded us. Just then, I heard a rustling in the woods and turned around with my phone in hand and turned the flash on to see what had caused the ruckus. Me being drunk at the time, I literally had no thoughts in my mind, and me being curious, I decided to go check it out and ventured a bit deeper into the grass with the dark of the branches looming all around me. I stubbed my toe against what seemed like a rock and almost let out a screech until I settled down and shrugged it off. I pulled my flash up to see what it was, and lo and behold, in front of me was the front tire of the truck that me and Doug had found earlier. I raised the flash a bit higher and got a better view of the whole truck and its layout. It was a rusty old green Ford, probably 90s or so, with a raised bed cover that had windows on the sides of the cover with cracked glass on every one. It looked as if it had sat idle there for a good 10 years without moving. I raised my flash a bit higher towards the front cab of the truck and peered inside, seeing old newspapers, crushed up beer cans, and strangely enough a few needles lying on the floorboard. That's when my curiosity simmered down a bit and my fear began to set in as I shifted my attention towards the sound that came from the back of the cab on the bed cover. I slowly walked with every grass and leaf crunching under my feet as if each step were 1,000 guns being shot at the same time. I reached the back of the cab and shakily raised my flash up to the side of the truck and into the window of the back cab. The flashlight peered up the glass of the window, and I raised it higher as my heart sank into complete and utter terror. What peered out of the glass at me was a man with eyes that had no pupils, and a smile that only a man on the edge of sanity could perform. He banged his arm up against the glass, and the shock of the sound sent me flying onto my back into the grass and dropping my phone. I frantically grabbed my phone from the ground and without a second thought, raised the light back to the man only to see him banging on the window with much more force. His arms were bleeding as he had needles sticking out of both arms. His shirt tattered with years of misfortune and a face meshed with scars. He began to bulge his eyes from his sockets as he laughed horribly and began to cry hysterically.
I knew you would come. It's you. About time you brought the fun to me.
I let out a blood-curdling scream, and with my heart racing a mile a minute, I wasted no time in hightailing it from the truck back to the campfire. I turned around to see the man get out of the truck, and he turned to face me, tilting his head with his murderous smile and deep white eyes illuminating through the moonlight that shined down as he began to walk towards me. My running turned into sprinting, and I ended up slamming into the campfire that we had set up, which made me fall face first into the gravel and dirt. The fire was now on its last legs, and was almost out at this point. However, my legs were now caught in a bit of flames themselves, and with my frantic rolling about on the ground, the fire on my pants was almost instantly put out.
Eric, what the hell is going on?
Doug shouted. I looked up at the three who were in complete fear at this point, and oblivious as to what lay in the woods just beside us. There's a man in the woods, in the truck we found. Out of breath, I said it as fast as I could get it out. That's when our attention shifted towards the truck in the tall grass. Two headlights beamed out of the grass, and the truck engine roared to life furiously. All of our hearts sank, and we instantly sobered up and realized the direness of our situation.
Get in the car,
Luis shouted. Me, Doug, and Isaiah looked at each other in frantic agreement and booked it to the car and locked the doors as soon as we got inside. Breathing heavily and shaking from what lay in the dark woods, we all agreed to start the car and get the hell out of Dodge. We started the car, only to find the headlights of the truck began to move and encircle us around our campsite.
Just put it in drive before he rams us,
Isaiah shouted. I floored the accelerator and hightailed it from our camping spot, leaving the tent and booze behind because at this point it didn't matter. The truck began to follow us and steadily gained speed on us as we began our death race towards the exit of the woods. The houses we saw earlier all had their lights on. With each house there was someone standing in the dark with the light illuminating behind them, all of them standing there, just watching us. Every single one.
What the hell, man? What the hell is this?
I shouted. The trees seemed as if they grew 100 feet higher and now fully encased us within these woods, and the darkness felt as if it was chasing us out of its home and screaming at us in agony. The truck behind us was almost touching my bumper at this point, and when I peered into the rearview mirror, I saw the man one last time. His eyes were stabbing mine as if to say,
I will kill you.
His pupils were non-existent, and his smile seemed more impossibly forced than before, and he was laughing to the point of insanity. I thought this was the end for us. Suddenly we shot out of the dark of the woods and into the open farm fields from earlier, and the truck behind us slammed its brakes, and we could hear the screech of tires so loudly it felt like it busted our eardrums. I looked in the mirror to see the truck slowly creep back into the forest from which it came, the darkness swallowing it up once again. We didn't play any music the rest of our way home, nor did we speak a word to each other about what had happened. Our heart rates were all up from the moment that we had pulled into Doug's driveway, and when we got out, we let out a sigh of relief. We each made our way to his shed, where he stays, and we all grabbed some waters and some food to calm us down. We watched some comedies and tried to talk our minds out of the events that had transpired. Due to the constant laughing of the movies and shows we watched, I had to step outside as I thought I was having a panic attack. All I could hear was that man laughing at me hysterically.
I knew it was you.
I shook my head and took long, deep breaths and headed back inside. I still keep in touch with these friends even though high school has all but ended. They are still my closest friends, and probably always will be. Although I've still yet to find my groove with the ladies, and much hasn't changed since then, one thing will never change. I will never forget the pure white eyes of that man's eyes, as well as his murderous smile. One thing that has bothered me until this very day is the fact that me and Doug noticed the truck very early on in the day. That man had watched us for hours, and I can't help to think about what these people were doing on their porches, just staring at us, not doing anything. Was this all coordinated? Were they just too scared of that man? Or were they just like that man and wanted this corner of the globe to stay to themselves? Well, in any case, you win. You can keep those woods to yourselves.